Hello, everybody, and welcome to the very first entry in a new series, Ancient Mathoms. I'm Onidsen from the White Tower blog, and I am collaborating with the Card Talk podcast to bring you a an updated look at the core set. With me today is Grant Thompson.
Hey, as always, I'm just along for the ride.
And our joint project is to take a look at the core set and the early cycles of the game and many of the cards which have become either over or underpowered through the passage of time. A brief word about the inspiration for this project. Listening to the Cardboard of the Rings podcast, they do a segment every now and again where they take a cycle and they rank the top three cards and the bottom three cards of the cycle. And as I listened, I kept being hit by the question: what could make those bottom cards of the core set and the early cycles playable? What can make them have more than just a niche place in modern decks? And one thing led to another, and before I knew it, I had mock-ups of revised core set cards sitting on my hard drive. And now that they're here, I'm going to inflict them on the rest of you.
Yeah, and bearing in mind, these mock-up cards are just something that we've discussed, we've put out in the community. These are just opinions on what we think could make them playable in the game as it stands now.
Certainly, these are not meant to represent any sort of official update to the core set, although it would be nice if something like this happened. Anyways, I think that's enough of an introduction. Let's go ahead and get started talking about the cards, and let's start with the one card that's going to get a nerf. Grant, you want to give us an introduction?
Yes, we're talking about the attachment Steward of Gondor. 2 cost, attached to a hero. Attached hero gains a Gondor trait. Action exhaust Steward of Goddor to add 2 resources to attached hero's pool. Now, this card has fit into so many decks, even with just a splash of leadership or no leadership at all, and just completely overtakes on resource acceleration from the turn it's played.
There is literally no downside to this card. It may well be one of the single most powerful cards in the game, and it has certainly warped the meta since the core set when it was introduced. Um, and so we thought, as we were going through this, that it might be a good idea to see if we could bring it down a notch, open up a little bit more space to for other resource generating effects. Um, a lot of people already do that with deck building, but this is something that we thought would be an a play that would expand the opportunities here. So our proposed update um, keeps the same cost. Play only if you control a noble hero. Um, a thematic restriction that really isn't going to make it hugely difficult to still fit into decks. Um, you're still attached to a hero, but it enters play exhausted. I think that's key and critical here. One of the things that makes the original version of Steward of Goddor so powerful is that from the turn you play it, you actually don't lose anything. You spend 2 resources on this powerful resource generating attachment and immediately get them back by exhausting it. When it enters play exhausted, um, you're still going to have this powerful resource generating attachment, 2 resources around from the moment you play it, but it's now a tempo hit. It's going to set you back 2 resources. You're going to have to ask yourself the question, can I make it through this turn to start getting benefits from these extra resources next turn?
Yeah, and this was a hard one for us to sort of nerf. as it was, because it was like, how do we do it without breaking it?
Um, when we put it out to the community, some people were outraged that we'd nerfed it, and some people thought we didn't go far enough.
Yeah,
Um, I think it's probably a good idea to bring up our philosophy with this. Our goal is to have as light a touch on these cards as we can, keep them as close as we can to their original version, so we're not going to be going out there and creating massively different cards with one or two possible exceptions that may show up in the future, and we will call them out explicitly when they happen. And so, hence the light nerf to the Steward of Gondor that leaves it almost the same as it's always been, just with a little more question of, can I play it now?
yeah.
Any,
So,
anything else you want to say about this one, Grant?
no, I was just going to say, do you fancy moving on to the next?
All right. Um, that was the only card from the Leadership Sphere that we actually felt needed a nerf in the core set. The Leadership Sphere is rather significantly underpowered. You can see that there are quite a few more cards left that we've given us a slight boost to. This next one's going to be really quick. Colibri Stone. It's a 2-cost attachment attached to a hero, restricted, and gives the attached hero +2 willpower. And if it happens to be Aragorn, he also gains a spirit icon, which is wonderful and good and still very useful in the modern meta. And you might ask, why does it even need a boost? And the only boost we actually gave it was to remove the restricted keyword, and that was for more thematic concerns. If we're going through and touching these cards already, that is a thing that has bothered a lot of players over the years. Why is this Colibri Stone restricted when normally that's reserved for armor and weapons and shield attachments that are taking up one of the hero's hands?
And when you actually look at all the other stat boosts or equipment for Aragorn, like his toys, like Sword That Was Broken, Ring of Barahir, or Rodrin, they're all unrestricted. This Colibri Stone was the only one that had the restricted keyword. So I think it felt better taking the restriction off to pair it better with the rest of his equipment.
I think so too. It's mostly a thematic change. It makes it feel a little bit better, like you're not um, taking up one of your hand slots for a little stone there. Uh,
Right.
Moving on, I don't have much more to say about that.
Nope. I think we're moving on to Daedra next.
Yep.
The 8 cost 1 willpower, 2 attack power, 1 defense point, 4 hit point, Rohan Noble Warrior with the response after he commits to a quest, choose a hero, commit to that quest, and add a resource to that hero's resource pool.
So Theodred is still a rather useful utility hero, even in the modern pool. What would you describe as his biggest weakness, Grant?
He's willpower. He's one of these heroes that has to commit to the quest. And yes, you've got ways of boosting his willpower, like Colibri Stone or Favor of the Lady, but it's still it's one of his weakest stats. For a questing hero, you want them to be about a 2 willpower or a way to easily have more willpower coming off your questers.
So what we've done with Theodred is just moved that single point of defense into willpower. If you'll count up the stats, the total amount is the same, his threat cost is the same. We've just changed the distribution slightly. This makes him marginally better. 2 willpower is certainly more useful than 1. In any really powerful decks that he's in, it's not really changing his role. But what I think this really does is open up a lot of thematic space in the pure Rohan decks that might want to run Theodred but struggle with questing early on. And now
Definitely.
Theodred's actually helping a little bit more.
I just wouldn't trust Theodred to go siege quest.
That's fair. That's completely fair.
So I think the next biggest change we've had is the next card in our list, Brock Iron Fist.
Brock Iron Fist. Oh boy. Brock Iron Fist. This is a card that is completely awful. It's a 6-cost ally, 2 willpower, 2 attack, 1 defense, 4 hit points, and his response, after a dwarf hero you control leaves play, put Brock Iron Fist into play from your hand. So, his biggest weakness is he's ridiculously expensive. 6 cost is incredibly hard to come up with, even in the resource-heavy leadership sphere, and his stats are nowhere near worth 6 cost.
Well, when I think of 6-cost allies, I jump to Beyond, and Beyond's stat line and ability are much better than this guy.
Much, much better. And, I mean, you might say, well, of course he's expensive, but it doesn't matter because you're not going to be paying for him. You're going to just use your ability to put him into play for free. But if you think about it, that means you're planning on losing a hero. Which, I mean, if you're planning on losing a hero, you want a little bit more than a 2-2-1 ally to make up for that. So what have we done to Brock Iron Fist to make him marginally better?
We've added a response. So after you play Brock Iron Fist from your hand, discard the top card of your deck until a dwarf ally is discarded, then put that ally into play. So basically, we've continued with the new theme of the dwarves being miners and having it mill your deck for an ally that you can put into play.
And it should be noted that we've slightly changed the wording of his original response to make it so that you can chain the two together. If you lose a dwarf hero, you can play Brock Iron Fist from your hand for free, and then discard cards until you find another dwarf ally and put that into play for free as well.
Yeah.
2 allies is certainly better than just Brock when it comes to compensation for losing a hero, and especially if it could be an expensive ally like Gimli or the Soldier of Erebor.
Yeah.
And if you can set it up so that you can get one of those allies into play for free, then Brock Iron Fist could even be worth playing from your hand at 6 resources, because you're getting a 3 or 4 or 5 cost ally for free out of it.
Yeah. And it works even if you've just got a splash of leadership in a spirit deck, and you say have a dwarf hero that's about to bite the dust. Do the Fall of Gil-galad, reduce your threat, and then play Fortune of Fate to bring them back, but you've also got Brock Iron Fist into play with another ally.
There's probably a really interesting janky deck there to be played.
And I think you're the king of jank.
Another thing to note is that his response triggers only if you play him from your hand.
Yeah.
Deliberately designed so that if you try to sneak attack him or use reinforcements or a very good tail to get him into play, it's
Or
not.
Fend for Aid or anything like that.
Right. None of those is going to trigger his ability.
Although Elfstone would.
Elfstone probably would.
Because you're playing it from your hand.
I'll have to check that, but I think you're right there. So there's a combo, everybody. Elfstone and Brock Iron Fist now.
Let's just check the wording on Elfstone. Just so we know before we're home. Right.
Elfstone, it's
When attached to a response after attached location, leaves play the first ally puts one ally into play from his hand.
that one would probably need a rules clarification. I'm inclined to clarify it as saying no, putting into play from your hand is not the same as playing from your hand.
Okay, well, there's the ruling.
There
No
we go.
Elfstone.
All
Okay.
right. Guard of the Citadel.
The two cost one willpower, one attack point, zero defense, two hit point, Gondor warrior with no ability.
Well, I
We'll
think
make
you
it
just
like,
hit on his big problem right there, Grant.
yeah, no ability. So we've made a slight change to the Guard of the Citadel by giving them a response. After Guard of the Citadel commits to a quest, choose a hero. Until the end of the phase, any damage that would be assigned to that hero is assigned to Guard of the Citadel instead.
A suitably thematic ability, I think. A guard
Yep.
that actually feels like he's doing some guarding.
Yeah.
Um, the interesting thing about the original Guard of the Citadel is that his stats were fine. It's just his lack of ability meant that he very, very quickly gets upstaged by other leadership allies with the same stat line or a better stat line and a useful ability. And so the hope is by giving him a useful ability, and I think that that ability is useful.
Well, yeah. If, for example, Eowyn's on 2 hit points and you reveal a Necromancer's Reach, that is going to work wonders.
Exactly. Um, or if you're playing one of those quests that has enemies that attack from the staging area, and you reveal something that attacks from the staging area, um, you can put that damage on the Guard of the Citadel instead of whoever was going to get thrown, whichever hero was going to have to get thrown under the bus.
Yep.
At the same time, I don't think it's too powerful because it only affects direct damage done in the quest phase and can't actually protect your heroes once the combat phase happens.
Yeah. I'd agree with that. He's not overpowered, but he's definitely not underpowered anymore.
All right. The next on the list is the Longbeard Slayer, a 4-cost leadership ally, a dwarf and a warrior with 2 attack, 1 defense, and 3 hit points, and a very powerful but very situational ability. After he enters play, deal 1 damage to each orc enemy in play.
Yeah.
And this one was kind of a difficult one to work around because there are some quests and situations where he is definitely worth including in your deck. They're just few and far between and have gotten
Anything
fewer
with
and further between as the game's grown on.
yeah, anything with goblins, he works wonders.
But also at 4 cost, it's very difficult to save up enough to get him into play, and once you do, his stat line is not impressive.
No.
Um,
So what we're doing to make him slightly better then?
well, I took a page, a leaf from the Erebor Guard's book. The Erebor Guard is a 4-cost spirit dwarf with 1 attack, 2 defense, and 3 hit points, so a very similar stat line. And his ability just says, after you play him from your hand, discard the top 2 cards of your deck to reduce his cost by 2. And I just copied that ability straight over for the Longbeard Slayer, so he fits in a dwarven mining deck. You can reduce his cost and get in 2 costs for 2 attack with a pretty solid pool of hit points. That's good value, and in some quests, you can deal a bunch of damage out to orcs.
Okay. I think that would work very well, regardless of whether being up against orcs or not. So the next one up, we have the Silverlode Archer. The 3 cost 1 willpower, 2 attack point, 0 defense, 1 hit point, Sylvan with ranged. What a mouthful.
Yeah, I mean, 2 ranged attack is not bad. But for 3 cost with only 1 hit point and no ability, you're not going to pick him very often because there's just better choices out there.
Yep. I think I'd rather save up an extra one and pull Longbeard Slayer.
Or spend 1 less and bring in the Greenwood Archer.
Well, that as well if we're going with current cards.
So what we've done is we wanted to make the Silverlode Archer work a little better with a modern Sylvan deck. So we gave him an enters play ability.
Yep.
After the
Go ahead, you'll take it.
After the Silverlode Archer enters play, choose an enemy. Until the end of the round, that enemy gets -2 attack. I think this is a useful ability for a Sylvan deck because they often can struggle with a defense. Unless you're running Thranduil, but even then, it can be very useful to take a big boss enemy like a hill troll and say, this round you have -2 attack, and so maybe I don't have to throw somebody under the bus. Maybe I can actually defend an attack.
Yeah. I think that would work very well, and you can even if you're running Thranduil, you can actually wait to play the Silverlode Archer until the combat phase to see what you're actually getting.
Exactly, it's a very useful um, mid phase play. Even might be worth sneak attacking in now.
Quite possibly. I could see a couple of situations where I could use that could be handy.
hmm Another option, of course, would be to take a weak enemy and bring it down to 0 attack, so you can safely take it undefended.
Eastern Crow.
Well,
um,
the other thing we've done to the Silverlode Archer is boosted his hit points to 2 to make him less vulnerable to direct damage, which Sylvans can have a problem with.
yeah.
And lastly, we've taken the Archer trait, which got exactly no development, and replaced it with the more generalized Warrior trait.
Yeah, I think there's only one other card in the game with the Archer trait, and I think that's the Horseback Archer.
And spoiler alert, he's going to get the Warrior trait too.
So next up, I think we've got the Son of Arno, which is the 3 cost, 0 willpower, 2 attack, 0 defense, 2 hit point Dunedain with the or Dunedain, with the response after Son of Arno enters play, choose an enemy in the staging area or currently engaged with another player and engage that enemy.
Now, this ally has an ability which could be very useful in Dunedain decks and even situationally useful in a number of quests that have enemies that make it difficult to get them down from the staging area.
Yeah.
But at 3 cost for an unimpressive stat line, it's a hard sell to put him in your deck instead of one of the other solutions to those particular enemies.
Yeah. I mean, he's a good damage sponge with 2 hit points. So if you just need someone to soak up a little bit of archery here or there.
And if all else fails, he's a good chump blocker.
Exactly. But at 3 cost, it's kind of an expensive trump blocker.
So what have we done to him, Grant?
Um, we we've lowered his cost.
There were a number of things that we considered, boosting his ability slightly by maybe dealing a damage to the enemy you just engaged, or maybe drawing a card after you engage the enemy, something to make it worth the 3 cost you're spending on him. But at the end of the day, we looked at it and we decided, well, really, fundamentally, the problem is he's just too expensive.
Yeah. So instead, we're just dropping down the cost to 2, and it works.
Yeah, and now he's 2 cost for 2 attack and 2 hit points, and an ability that is going to be useful at least some of the time.
Yeah.
And there's not much
So
more you can ask about it for that.
no, there's not. Um, so I think the Dunedain Swarm's coming back again.
I think that brings us to the end of the allies here.
It does indeed. We are now on to the events. Ever vigilant. Choose and ready one ally card for 1 cost.
Well, so is this a totally useless card, Grant?
Not totally useless, but I generally don't run it because I'd rather probably save up and cast a Grim Resolve instead of just paying 1 for readying 1 ally. I'd rather ready all my characters, all the characters with a Grim Resolve. But I can see its uses if you need that little extra boost with Faramir that you've already used once. I can see it working, but for me, it just doesn't cut it.
And I think that outside of the decks that want to abuse Faramir's ability, ready him up as much as possible, and then exhaust him to keep adding an extra willpower to every questing character for one player. Outside of that, I don't think this card gets played at all.
I can see it working with the Warden of Healing or healers in general, so that you can constantly strip off that damage. But I don't think it's very often that it gets used in the current meta.
So what have we done to try to maybe boost its stock a little bit?
We've kept it ready. Ready. We've changed it slightly. Instead of just choosing ready 1 ally card, we've given it ready a character, and until the end of the phase, that character gets ranged and sentinel. So you can ready a hero, you can ready pretty much anybody, but they also get the range and sentinel if you're playing in multiplayer, which could come in handy.
So it's a 1 cost solution to my friend across the table is taking an attack they can't deal with, already up either a tump blocker or a good defender of mine and block their attack that I otherwise wouldn't be able to.
Yeah. Or even my friend's got 6 damage, the enemy needs 7. That guy, he doesn't have range, but now he does. And I think that leads us on to our last card.
Common Cause. The leadership sphere sure loved its readying events in the core set. Exhaust
Yeah.
1 hero you control to choose and ready a different hero, 0 cost. This assumes that you have a hero that you weren't using for something already. And with the possible exception of the lore version of Bilbo, I think that's a really tough sell.
Agreed. I think the only thing that I could see this working with before it got errated was Beravor.
True.
You kept the hero back. You used Beravor, then you exhausted the other hero, used Common Cause to use Beravor again.
That's true. Um, but she's since been eroded, so you can't do that, and
Yeah,
wisely so, I think.
yeah. Drawn through your deck in the first turn.
So, in order to boost Common Cause a little bit, we've kept the basic ability the same. We looked at it and we're like, yeah, exhaust a hero to ready another. That's not a bad idea, but just to trade one hero's action for another, it's kind of a hard sell in the modern card pool to spend 3 deck slots for that. So we've also added that hero gets a stat boost, +1 willpower, +1 attack, and +1 defense until the end of the phase. So you're holding a hero back and readying another hero, but also making that hero better at whatever they were doing.
Yeah. So, for example, if you're going through Shadows of the Past, and you've kept Pippin back, just in case you got that emergency hide test, and then you pay Common Cause to ready Sam, Sam would be then questing for Hawk. Just as an example.
Mm-hmm. And if you didn't need the willpower, you could wait until the combat phase, and Sam would be attacking and defending for more.
Mm-hmm.
And
So,
and that's it. Those are our leadership cards. Anything else you want to say about them, Grant?
no, nothing that I have to say. I think we've done a good job on these, and remember, these are just our own opinions. They do not reflect what FFG are putting out or what should have happened with these cards. These are just our humble opinions.
Absolutely. But we did attempt to get feedback from the community to make sure that we weren't doing anything too overpowered or, conversely, anything that didn't actually fix the problem we were trying to fix.
Exactly.
So, these cards will be available for download on the White Tower blog. There'll be an article that accompanies this video, and it'll have a link to download the images for these cards so that you can load them up to Octagon yourself and play with these new versions, or even take them to the printer if you want to try them out with physical cards.
Yep, and it will also be going up on Card Talk's YouTube channel, as well as your own, I believe, isn't it?
Yep, I'll be hosting it there as well. So there's a number of different ways you'll be able to find us and follow us for the rest of the spheres in the core set, and then on to Shadows of Mirkwood and beyond. And with that, I think we'll wrap up our first episode of the Ancient Mathoms series. Thank you for watching, and until we meet again, happy questing.